On Sunday afternoon, Alexei Tsipras led his left-wing party coalition to a second victory in just a few months in the Greek elections. Alexei Tsipras's party has run on the platform of trying to resolve the Greek debt crisis by renegotiating its debts and by promoting greater economic stability, by ending austerity in the country, and working more closely with its European allies to achieve debt forgiveness. Today, the 2015 CU Seminar class is going to be discussing the Greek crisis. We're going to be talking about its causes and its origins. We're going to be talking about some of the recent history, and we're going to hopefully be looking into the future to see what can be done. I'm joined today by our three-member panel, Lucas Costa, Rebecca Hoffman, and Mark Kennedy. Thank you all for making it. So let's go ahead and get started. Whoever wants to jump in, kind of explain a little bit about the background of the Greek crisis, what's going on with the Greek economy.
Well, a lot of people believe that this goes back a number of years, back to like 07, 08, when the U.S. first got into its recession, and we had our housing market collapse, and a lot of those securities were tied up in foreign markets, including Greece, and that became a huge problem in Greece when that housing market collapsed. That was kind of where it started, along with the entire Eurozone crisis. A lot of people called it the Great Recession, just because the entire world was feeling some economic strain at that point.
Well, I think what we see from now in this scenario is that ever since back then in 2008, you see countries such as Greece, Portugal, Spain, Ireland, that haven't kept up the pace with the fast-paced economy and keeping a well-structured welfare state without making changes in its economic sector. And now what we're seeing is the damage of trying to maintain that high level of welfare state in those countries, trying to catch up with an economy that is changing quite fast, and as you can see, for example, in the example of Germany.
What sorts of economic changes are you referring to?
A more opening internationalization and broadening their markets, the economic markets abroad, and trying to open their economic relationships with other countries, and trying to establish a new perspective economic-wise. And what you see is Greece, in the example of Greece, lacking that sort of change in trying to adapt to this new global area.
Right, but from the beginning, Greece has had structural problems, especially being able to form as one country, and them wanting to keep up with the rest of the countries that are around them is they shouldn't have done that, because they weren't physically structured and they weren't capable of holding it on their own. So to be able to join something that everybody else can handle on their own, and think that nobody else was going to find out in the end that they weren't going to be able to hold on, is just wasn't correct. What they shouldn't have done that, because they risked the lives of the entire country as well as all the citizens that are within it.
When you talk about the fiscal structure of the economy, I think it's a great insight. Can you give maybe the viewers some examples, any of you, of what you mean by fiscal structure, and how having an unstructured economy might lead to this kind of a crisis?
I think you certainly need to address the tax reforms for each specific country, and a lot of what is going on in Greece right now is that instead of making slow changes within the tax reforms for the public population, you see now a drastic change trying to address tax reforms for public that are being way too high now. And
well, what was the initial problem with the Greek tax structure that made reforms necessary?
they were aspiring to maintain a high level of social standards. For instance, um, their their employment rates and trying to find withdrawing within their banks and the amount of mortgages systems and all that. And you see now. Um,
It almost sounds like you're describing sort of a light version of the American economy, where we have a lot of government assistance, maybe the development of a welfare state like Social Security and Medicare. Although I guess in the United States, while we have budget deficits, we have a fairly broad tax code. But I guess in Greece, it probably wasn't quite as broad. So whenever the Greek economy began to experience trouble, when as Mr. Kennedy pointed out, when the recession of 2008 hit and the Greek economy began to kind of sputter and spin out of control, how did the rest of the world react? What was Europe's initial reaction to the Greek problem?
In my opinion, I think their initial reaction was, they should their initial reaction was that there was something that they didn't do that was correct. Like, for instance, it was probably their prime minister's fault. They blamed it on their leftist prime minister. Basically, they blamed it on socialism. They blamed it on all those types of the reason why they are, the reason why their economy is the way it is right now.
Take, for example, the creation of the European Union and the European Commission. That was their response years ago to a period of time that you needed to find a structure to build a social structure for countries that were destabilized economic-wise, and they did not have quite the structure for their population. And you see now. What you see now is a heterogeneous mixture of countries trying to come together as a unit, addressing an economic issue that started with the stubbornness from certain countries such as Greece that were reluctant to make the changes with an economy such as German economy, French economy, English economy.
It seemed that, moving on to talk more broadly about the recession and the response, it seemed that in Europe there were two basic approaches to the recession. The first was something maybe a bigger version of what the United States did, try to spend your way out or cut taxes your way out of the recession. The other was something called austerity. Either you care to talk a little bit about what austerity is, how it impacted Greece, and maybe why austerity was imposed upon Greece to get it out of the hole that it was in.
For austerity, you can understand more of harsh measures for maintaining the amount of social benefits that the population have, and trying to keep it in higher standards, and the government having this public expenditure and not being able to keep up with the benefits required by the population, and not having the enough financial support to keep up with that. And what you see now is like a lapse of the austerity that the Greeks are suffering now. That they want to try to maintain those benefits that they used to have, without a government that can actually financially support the Greek needs for this welfare.
Yeah, they should have known, like, for them. I do believe what you're saying, Lucas, is correct. They should have known what they would not be able to do, but they knew what they were doing when they borrowed more than they necessarily should have. Even when shouldn't have borrowed that large quantities of money from other places and other countries, as well as they have had several bailouts, presented to them to help them rebuild their population or as their economy of some sort. And I think we're on number 3 now, I believe. I just don't think that they are really going. Their prime minister is his main goal is to recover, and I just think they're just going to go further in.
Before we get maybe a little bit into sort of the side effects of austerity, when we use the phrase austerity, what exactly are we talking about? Maybe even if you need to use the American economy as an example, what does it mean to say that a country is going through austerity, an austerity process?
It means that a country needs to go through a budget. It's going through a budget deficit, and it needs to address the situation by changing the public expenditure that the country is currently doing to its people, which would mean tax reforms, less benefits for the general population, such as Social Security, health benefits, health plans that the government technically provides to the civilians.
So if the U.S. were to try and use austerity as a way of balancing our own budget, what sorts of things do you think we would see?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
You would cut healthcare benefits. You would see a rise of private institutions trying to cover what public needs could not offer to its population. You would see a higher age for retirement. Basically, less benefits that the general population would technically have access to in states that provided such needs, basic needs, education, healthcare.
So now that we've talked a little bit about the crisis itself and maybe some of its causes, what is the concern about the Greek crisis as it relates to the rest of Europe? How do we see it affecting the rest of the Eurozone or maybe the rest of the European Union as we go forward? What do y'all think?
Well, first of all, I mean, Greece is already in debt to the IMF and the European Bank. I mean, so that's part of it is the debt aspect, and then part of it is they're part of this larger union as a whole, and if they get out of it, then they won't be using the euro anymore, which will mess with international trade between all the European nations. But between those two things, it'll be, I wouldn't say catastrophic, but it'll definitely have an impact.
And you have to analyze the other scenario of this event, the Greek crisis, is more. You have to see as well as an opportunity for other nations to have their spheres of influence, their power over other states, and see and mark how they want to keep Greece in the Eurozone. They know they have been postponing the crisis for quite a while now. If you keep track on the bailouts that is being offered to Greece, and you see the need of maintaining the sense of unity, but you also see this sense of establishing nations that can overcome other nations by establishing rules and law reforms. More like a game of power.
For the viewers at home who may not be as familiar, I apologize, I used a couple of terms that they may not have known the definition to. Would somebody want to walk us through what is the difference between, say, the European Union and the Eurozone? What are those concepts and how are they different?
the Eurozone and the countries that use have opted to change their currency. Um, you see the European Union as the whole group of countries that have been invited to join a political economic union among countries, and you see the Euro Union, um, European, as a financial change for the currencies for the countries that have opted to change their currency to adopt a single monetary um, currency to help and to facilitate the assist the in trades, the exchange goods, and
So,
In my opinion, the eurozone is is responsible for the monetary policy, basically the central banking, and the European Union is basically a combination of independent institutions um, that basically control the economic and political union when it comes to Greece's the economy.
so then if I were to, again, try to make it sort of an American example, it would be as if you had American states that were not required to have the U.S. dollar as their primary currency. If maybe a Florida or a California had their own currency. What would be the advantages? Why would a country like Greece get involved in the Eurozone in the first place if their involvement is so important to understanding this crisis?
Well, it facilitates trade for one. It's much easier to do trade on an international basis, on that international level, if you have an internationally uniform currency.
Okay, so much like trading goods across state lines in the United States, I get that makes sense. So then, getting back to the crisis itself, why does the crisis, or how does the crisis impact the rest of Europe, and maybe how does it impact the Eurozone countries worse than, say, countries that are not a part of the European Union, or a country like Great Britain that is in the European Union but not part of the Eurozone?
a lot can be said from the private sectors from countries in the Eurozone that have already established a good influence in rising economies in other countries, such as Greece in that case. And what they want to do is they want to establish an economic system where they benefit the private institutions from other countries, such as Germany and France, to create an economic status of, okay, you depend on us, and we can provide you loans or provide economic benefits from our money and our investments, but you have to be open to the sort of changes that we would require to benefit mutually from an exchange of interests. And that basically what summarizes one of the biggest problems from the Greek crisis was that the private sector from these countries they were suffering from the continuous loans that Greece was being required, and now you don't see a return from the Greek part, and that's why pretty much they want to maintain Greece until they have their independence to retribute the economic assistance that has been given to Greece.
The way you're making it sounds almost like Greece's options are to either repay the debts or to face the possibility of a pretty costly and kind of brutal divorce with the other European zone partners. Is that kind of what you're saying?
In reality, that's pretty much the two options that the Prime Minister recently re-elected has to face. It's you either stay with us and address the changes that we're requiring you to make, or be independent and solve the economic issues that you have created with the drachma, your Greek currency, and try to solve that on your own.
In my opinion, the reason with the stuff that is going on in Greece with their economy, I think that will affect other countries because you have the immigrants that are coming over, and because their economy is in bad shape, how are they supposed to support them? And if Greece cannot support these immigrants that are coming in, they're going to be pushed off to other countries because of that.
It does seem to be sort of a cruel twist of fate that the very member of the European zone that is having the greatest economic problems also happens to be the first destination for many of the refugees that are fleeing into Europe. What about for us here in the United States or maybe other countries in North America? Do we have anything to fear from the Greek crisis? Is this something that stops at the Atlantic Ocean? Or if Greece ended up leaving the Eurozone, could that have a negative impact on the American economy as well? What do you guys think?
Well, you'd have to take a hard look at just the economic relationships between America and Greece, like exports and imports, and especially tourism. I would say maybe the tourism industry would maybe take a hit during a recession.
But
And I mean,
you,
I'm saying Americans might want to go to Greece. That's why I mentioned that.
some say that the Greek crisis won't really interfere with American or Western countries in general. If you look at the social aspect of it, you will try to understand why some nations want to maintain their influence in Greece and try to, for instance, what we had if from history, the Marshall Plan, the attempt of Bush trying to maintain its interest in Eastern European Union. Um, you can try to you can see an attempt in the future years to consolidate that influence in Eastern countries that are going through the crisis. But as far as a new economic crisis or a bubble coming up in other countries, you could see that happening, but not due um, a Greek fault. That's at least my opinion. I don't see, for instance, if you take the main sources of income for Greece as tourism or the naval part of it, you won't see that much effect or counter effect in other nations that technically don't depend on Greece economy.
And maybe to the degree that there's been a separation between the two in the last 5 to 7 years might actually have served to insulate Europe from the Greek crisis, which makes perfect sense. Um, what if, and so you guys are talking mostly about what if Greece chooses to leave the European Union. Do you think that it actually would be more harmful to the EU and to the Eurozone if Greece stayed in and tried to work through their problems? Or do you think maybe it would actually be worse if Greece was forced to leave? What do you think is in the EU's best interest?
I think for the EU as a whole, it would probably be best if Greece just got out and started, went back to the drachma just because of the debt. I keep remembering the debt as being a central part of this discussion. It's something like $300 billion that have been loaned to Greece, probably more than that. And I think that debt will just keep growing exponentially until
There
Greece.
is no guarantee that I'm sorry. There is no guarantee that Greece will know how to do the follow-up after if it decides to leave the European Union. But the scenario now does favor a little bit from the exit of Greece from it, because what you see now is a rate of unemployment really high domestically, and if you exit the European Union, what we would see is a higher focus on domestic policies and domestic employment and trying to reconstruct and restructure from the basis, from the ground up, the Greek economy. And it's hard to pull it off, especially if you're already in the negative. on the red number, but from what they're
I've heard similar arguments made about the benefit to Greece being able to rapidly devalue their currency, something that they can't do right now, that by devaluing their currency dramatically, it could actually promote exports, although at the expense of probably leading to higher inflation, which I guess makes some sense too. So this kind of, I guess, gets us to where we were maybe a few months ago with this debate about what Greece should do in response to the debt crisis. What actually has been done? Let's talk for a minute about Tsipras's response, the current Prime Minister of Greece, what his response was to the austerity measures, and maybe a little bit about what he hoped would come out of negotiations. Ms. Hoffman, do you want to take that on?
In my opinion, you know, what the Prime Minister hoped to get out of the negotiations was, especially when it came to the election, of course, as well, he thought, you know, that if he proclaimed that, you know, that if we take, you know, if we take the bailout and we change it, our currency, then, you know, we're not going to be able to survive, and that he is the one that can actually change it. He's had several times to be able to change it, and in my opinion, I don't think he's going to take the country in the right direction when it comes to this type of recession.
Why not? What do you think are some of the challenges that he faces? Why can't Greece just go to the foreign banks and the creditors in the European Union and just say, you know, either you cancel the debt and you release these pressures, or we're out?
Because if you go from so if he goes from one currency to another, you cannot do that, especially with a population. To be able to change from one currency to another, you would have to physically shut down all the banks, as well as it will take up to 6 months for them to actually reboot their banking systems, as well as change all the currency from theirs to drachma all at the same time, and it's just, in my personal opinion, it would cause more harm to do that than to be able to switch it. They should just, you know, during the election they should have changed it. There was a large quantity of people that did not show up for that election because they felt that he was still saying the same things that he said years before.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Mr. Kennedy? You know, let's imagine that you were in charge of the Greek economy, that you were in charge of the Greek country, that you were the prime minister, and you were the one who was negotiating the banks. Do you think you could have gotten a better deal than the one that Tsipras got, or do you think that what they received was sort of the best case scenario for their government?
No, I don't think I could have done a better job than he did. I think the man's been in politics a while, and I think anyone in the position that he's in is going to make a lot of enemies because he's working on an issue that polarizes his nation, and so there's going to be a contingent that says this man is terrible, we need someone else. But at the end of the day, he's only a man, as am I, and no, I don't think I could have done any better.
I see the other side. There is a reason why he got reelected, but there is a reason why. For example, if you take his speech back in January, he promised to accomplish two things that technically can't match. That is to remove the Greek crisis and Greece out of the economic crisis, and try to cushion the austerity measures that were being imposed in the Greeks. And if I were him, there are definitely other measures that I could think of to try to exit this situation. For instance, austerity measures has to be a reality at least for the next 2 to 5 years. You see that in 2016 or 17 they will try to normalize the economy, but that is only achievable with the austerity measures and with some tax reform. And what you need to see, what I think of that could have been different in his campaign now that he got it reelected is more a internationalization and an open market policy. not just for the Eurozone, but try to open up to other countries and see an option to take advantage overseas to try to improve a really close and domestic economy, such as the Greek economy.
Yeah, you did mention the his campaign speech. It is kind of bizarre that you could have a politician who runs for office promising two things, fails miserably to deliver those promises to his people, holds a new election just 6 months later, and yet gets reelected to office. From the American's perspective, that's kind of hard to imagine, but I guess in the Greek political system, it makes perfect sense. So as we look towards the future, what do you think happens now? Where do you think the Greek system goes? Mr. Costa, you'd mentioned that you think that trying to move to rapid normalization and rapid austerity is probably, or a rapid end to austerity is probably not the best way to go. What about the rest of y'all? What do you think should happen in the Greek system for the next 2 to 3 years?
I think they should begin. Miss Rebecca mentioned that it would take like 6 months to reboot the system, so to speak. If that's what it takes, I think they should begin that, because I think that that's what they need. I think that they need to revert to the drachma and get away from the Eurozone at this point. They're too heavily in debt, and it's just time to start putting a tourniquet on the wound, so to speak.
What it has to be explicitly spoken now is that the problem is not really the loans and to pay the debt, the Greek debt. It's more of the GDP problem that is currently taking place in Greece. You have to address the unemployment and how to fix its own domestic issues, economic issues, and how to put Greeks into other sources of employment and that's the way that you can actually cushion the austerity measures, by providing a different source of employment for the Greeks that are way to use with the social benefits from a government that has been providing a lot of it.
Right. And in Greece in 2011, their GDP was 23.5%. To be able to improve their economy in the future, within Greece they have self-employed people, and these self-employed employers are not documenting the correct amount of income that they're earning, as well as they are not documenting they're over-documenting basically over-reporting the debt payments. And if we have people doing that still in the future, I don't really see a light at the end of the tunnel. I still see the dark for them. I don't see a way out, because you have the same prime minister doing the same things repeatedly in his speech. There was nothing, even if you look on his past speeches, there was nothing that was different. He just reworded it differently. But in reality, it was all the same speech. And the only way I think they can make a difference is if we don't have, the organizations like the Golden Dawn, and we have all these self-employed employers documenting fraud things, or just not documenting the correct amount. That's the only way that I can see this Greece making an improvement of some sort.
Yeah, and I can certainly see how it would be a problem. You sort of have the fox guarding the hen house, where the very people who are responsible for creating a crisis might be the ones who are also in charge of fixing it. Well, it looks like we're just about out of time. I wanted to say a final thank you to my guests, Lucas Costa, Rebecca Hoffman, and Mark Kennedy. And ask you all to join us again next week at 2 p.m. for another exciting discussion by the 2015 CU Seminar class. Thank you very much.
Welcome.